Most men don't ruin their lives in one dramatic moment. They do it slowly. Quietly. By betraying themselves a little more every day. Not with drugs. Not with crime. Not with some massive collapse. But with smaller things no one notices at first. Hitting snooze again. Avoiding the hard conversation. Scrolling for 2 hours because reality feels heavier than distraction. Laughing in rooms where they secretly feel invisible. Pretending they're just tired when the truth is, they've been emotionally exhausted for years. And the terrifying part? Modern society rewards this version of you. A distracted man spends more. An insecure man obeys more. An emotionally weak man is easier to manipulate. That's why so many men today feel numb without understanding why. Because the world taught them how to survive, but never how to control themselves. And in this video, we're going to talk about the quiet war happening inside you right now. Not motivational nonsense. Not fake alpha male screaming. Not grind harder advice. We're talking about the version of you that keeps sabotaging your future while pretending to protect you. The weak version. The comfortable version. The version that fears discomfort more than regret. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people never realize. The biggest threat to your life is not failure. It's becoming comfortable living below your potential. And near the end, I'm going to explain why some men stay trapped for decades even after reading self-improvement books, watching discipline videos, and trying to change over and over again. Because the real prison was never outside them. It was psychological. And once you see it, you can never unsee it again. So let's begin. There's a strange kind of loneliness that modern men experience now. Not physical loneliness. Psychological loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel disconnected from yourself. You wake up tired. You go through routines automatically. You answer messages. Go to work. Pay bills. Scroll at night. And somewhere deep inside, there's this quiet voice asking, what happened to me? Not because your life exploded. But because your spirit slowly faded. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Think about that carefully. If your mind spends years absorbing negativity, comparison, fear, distraction, shallow validation, outrage, artificial perfection, and constant stimulation, what do you think happens to your inner world? It changes you. Slowly. Almost invisibly. Most men think weakness looks dramatic. It doesn't. Weakness usually looks normal. That's what makes it dangerous. The weak version of yourself doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Skip today. You deserve comfort. You can start tomorrow. Why even try? No one cares anyway. And after enough repetition, those thoughts stop sounding like resistance. They start sounding like truth. That's how self-betrayal begins. Not in one massive decision. But through repeated emotional surrender. And society helps reinforce it. Because modern life profits from your lack of discipline. Think about it honestly. Entire industries are built around keeping you distracted, emotionally reactive, insecure, overstimulated, addicted to approval, addicted to escape, addicted to comfort. Your attention is being hunted every second. Your weakness is profitable. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature centuries ago. People are easier to control when they are emotionally unstable. That truth never disappeared. It simply evolved. Today, people don't need chains to control men. They use dopamine. Distraction. Validation. Comfort. Fear of exclusion. Fear of being judged. Fear of silence. That's why so many men can sit alone in a room for 5 minutes and immediately reach for their phones. Because silence forces confrontation. And confrontation reveals truth. The truth that many men are not actually at peace. They are simply distracted enough to avoid themselves. And eventually, reality catches up. Maybe it happens when someone leaves you. Maybe when you look in the mirror and barely recognize yourself anymore. Maybe when another year passes and nothing changes. Maybe when you realize your body is weaker, your mind is duller, your confidence is gone, and your ambition has quietly died. That moment hits hard. Because deep down, you know you were meant for more. And that realization creates a painful internal war. One side of you wants growth. The other wants comfort. One side wants discipline. The other wants escape. One side wants truth. The other wants excuses. And the dangerous part is this. The weak version of yourself often disguises itself as self-protection. It says, "Don't risk embarrassment. Don't try too hard. Don't put yourself out there. Stay safe. Stay comfortable." But comfort has destroyed more potential than failure ever did. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Most men are not destroyed by reality. They are destroyed by anticipation. By fear. By imagined humiliation. By imagined rejection. By imagined failure. So they stay frozen. And slowly, their lives shrink. You can actually see this happen in everyday life. The man who wants to start a business but spends years researching. The man who wants to get healthy but keeps waiting for motivation. The man who stays in toxic relationships because loneliness scares him more than disrespect. The man who knows he's wasting his life but keeps numbing himself every night because facing reality feels unbearable. And maybe the hardest truth of all. No one is coming to save him. That realization sounds harsh. But it's actually freeing. Because the moment you stop waiting for rescue, you reclaim power. Epictetus taught that suffering begins when we try controlling things outside ourselves while neglecting the only thing we truly control. Our own choices. That idea becomes life-changing once you truly understand it. Because modern society trains people to obsess over external things. Opinions. Status. Recognition. Validation. Comparison. Meanwhile, their internal world collapses. They know celebrity gossip but not their own emotions. They know social media trends but not their own purpose. They know how to entertain others but not how to sit peacefully with themselves. That's why many men secretly feel empty. Not because they lack pleasure. Because they lack direction. And direction only appears when you stop running from yourself. This is where the real battle begins. Not motivation. Not hype. Discipline. Quiet discipline. The kind no one applauds. The kind that happens early in the morning when nobody's watching. The kind that happens when your mind screams, "Quit," but you continue anyway. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means becoming emotionless. It doesn't. Discipline means refusing to let temporary emotions control permanent decisions. That's a completely different thing. You can feel fear and still act. You can feel exhausted and still move. You can feel uncertain and still continue. That's strength. Real strength is not loud. It's controlled. There's a reason calm men intimidate people. Because calmness is difficult to manipulate. Emotionally reactive people are predictable. Controlled people are dangerous. That's why emotional discipline matters so much. Every time you react impulsively, someone else controls the direction of your emotions. Every time you seek approval, someone else gains power over your self-worth. Every time you avoid discomfort, your future becomes weaker. But every time you act despite resistance, you rebuild authority over yourself. And that process starts small. That's something many men need to hear. Transformation is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It usually starts quietly. One decision. One difficult conversation. One workout. One night spent learning instead of escaping. One morning waking up without hitting snooze. One moment of honesty. Momentum changes everything. Because once a man proves to himself that he can trust his own actions again, confidence slowly returns. Not fake confidence. Not social media confidence. Real confidence. The kind built through self-respect. And self-respect is earned. Not purchased. Not posted online. Earned. That's why so many men today feel internally weak despite appearing successful. Because achievements without self-respect feel empty. You can make money and still hate yourself. You can look successful and still feel powerless internally. You can be admired publicly and collapse privately. The modern world is full of men performing strength instead of building it. That's why so many people feel disconnected from authenticity. Everything becomes performance. Performance at work. Performance online. Performance in relationships. And eventually, men forget who they actually are beneath all the roles. That's why solitude matters. Not isolation. Solitude. There's a difference. Isolation destroys people. But solitude reveals people. Marcus Aurelius spent time alone not because he hated people, but because silence helped him hear himself clearly. And most modern men desperately need that clarity. Because without silence, you cannot observe your own mind. Without observation, you cannot identify self-sabotage. Without awareness, you remain trapped in unconscious patterns. This is why the weak version of yourself survives so long. Because most people never stop long enough to study themselves honestly. They stay distracted. Busy. Stimulated. Escaping. But the moment you begin observing your habits honestly, everything changes. You start noticing how often fear controls your decisions. How often comfort controls your schedule. How often insecurity controls your behavior. That awareness is painful. But necessary. Because you cannot change what you refuse to confront. And confrontation is where transformation begins. Not self-hatred. Not shame. Awareness. A man who can observe himself honestly becomes difficult to manipulate. Because he understands his weaknesses before the world weaponizes them against him. That's why self-awareness is power. Machiavelli understood human manipulation deeply because he understood human weakness deeply. People betray themselves before the world betrays them. That's the uncomfortable truth. The man who constantly seeks validation will eventually tolerate disrespect. The man addicted to comfort will eventually lose resilience. The man terrified of loneliness will eventually accept relationships that destroy him. Weakness always creates vulnerability. And the world notices vulnerability fast. That doesn't mean you become paranoid. It means you become conscious. Conscious of what controls you. Conscious of what weakens you. Conscious of where your attention goes. Because attention shapes identity. Whatever controls your attention eventually controls your life. That's why protecting your mind matters so much now. Especially today. Especially in a culture designed to fragment attention and weaken focus. Most men are mentally exhausted not because life is impossible, but because their minds never rest. Constant noise. Constant comparison. Constant stimulation. Constant emotional pressure. And eventually, they lose connection with themselves completely. That's why stillness feels uncomfortable now. Stillness exposes unresolved emotions. Unresolved grief. Unresolved fear. Unresolved insecurity. But avoiding those things doesn't remove them. It buries them deeper. And buried emotions eventually control behavior from the shadows. This is why many men explode emotionally over small things. Because years of suppressed frustration eventually leak out somewhere. Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion. It was about understanding emotion without becoming enslaved by it. That distinction changes everything. A stoic man still feels pain. Still feels disappointment. Still feels grief. But he does not surrender control of his entire life to temporary emotional storms. That's mastery. And mastery requires practice. Daily practice. Because the weak version of yourself never fully disappears. That's another truth people avoid hearing. There is no final level where resistance disappears forever. There is no permanent state of effortless discipline. The battle continues. But something changes. You become stronger at responding. You recover faster. You stop collapsing every time life becomes uncomfortable. You stop negotiating with your excuses constantly. And eventually, you notice something incredible. Your mind becomes quieter. Not because life got easier. Because you became harder to break. That's real transformation. Not becoming perfect. Becoming resilient. A resilient man walks differently. Speaks differently. Decides differently. There's less desperation in him. Less neediness. Less emotional chaos. He stops chasing validation because he no longer depends on strangers to define his worth. And ironically, that's usually when people begin respecting him more. Because grounded energy is rare now. Most people today are emotionally impulsive. Reactive. Attention-starved. Approval-addicted. But disciplined calmness stands out. Not loudly. Quietly. That's why silent authority matters. Real authority is silent. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't scream for validation. It doesn't need constant recognition. It simply exists. Steady. Controlled. Unshaken. And that kind of inner stability becomes powerful in a chaotic world. So if you feel exhausted lately, if you feel disconnected from yourself, if you feel like you've slowly become someone you no longer recognize, you are not broken. But you do need to confront the version of yourself that keeps choosing comfort over growth. Because every day you delay that confrontation, the gap widens between who you are and who you could become. And eventually, regret becomes heavier than discipline ever was. So start small. Not dramatically. Quietly. Wake up earlier. Put the phone down. Train your body. Sit in silence. Have the difficult conversation. Keep promises to yourself. Stop escaping your own mind. Because every small act of discipline sends a message to yourself. I'm taking my life back. And over time, those moments rebuild identity. They rebuild self-respect. They rebuild internal authority. That's how men transform. Not through motivation. Through repeated acts of self-control. One decision at a time. One day at a time. One battle at a time. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The strongest version of yourself was never something you needed to find. It was something you needed to stop abandoning. If this video spoke to something real inside you, let me know in the comments. What's one habit, distraction, or weakness you know you need to confront right now? And if you're ready to rebuild discipline, emotional control, and inner authority in a world designed to weaken your focus, subscribe to Silent Authority. Because in a noisy world, calm men become dangerous.